Strings are a very important part of programming. And so let's now learn about an easy way to build strings using something called template literals. And let's start by creating some new variables here about a person, and in this case about me, so that we can then concatenate them into one big string. And the birth year. Okay, and so let's now use these variables to build a string, something like I'm Jonas, a 40 or 30-year-old teacher. So we're gonna then use this birth year to calculate the age, of course. So let's call that one simply Jonas. And as we already learned in one of the previous lectures, we can use the plus sign to concatenate strings. And so let's now start by doing that. So I want to write I'm, and here I'm seeing a problem. So when I want to use this single quote here for writing something like I'm or isn't, so basically when I need this symbol here, then I need to write the string itself using double quotes. Okay? Because otherwise, the single quote that I'm using here for I'm will finish the string. So I'm, and then I need a space, then the plus. And so here I'm saying I'm Jonas. And now I can actually use the single quotes. So what matters is that in each string, we start and finish with the same symbol. Right? But both just create strings the same way. So right now we have I'm Jonas, comma, a, and now we want the age. So let's say a 30-year-old teacher. So we need another space here. And then let's actually calculate the age. So that's the current year. So let's put that here as well. And let's again say that the year is 2037. So plus year minus the birth year. Now, in order to make this work, we actually need to put this operation between parentheses. Like this. And so it will do the calculation first and then the concatenation. But you might be wondering, well, the result of this is going to be a number, right? But the rest of the things that we're adding here are strings. So how is this going to work? Well, this has to do with something called type coercion, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this section. But basically, JavaScript will simply convert this number to a string so that it can concatenate them, so that it can join them with the rest of the strings. So you will see that it's going to work just fine. Okay, years old, and then the job. And then we can finish with an exclamation mark or something like that. All right. And then let's also log this to the console so we can take a look at it. Okay. So I'm Jonas, a 46-year-old teacher. And we're missing some spaces here. So that's around the years old. And you see that this is kind of a pain to manage these spaces and well, to keep track kind of how the sentence is structured. And so we will see a great solution to that in a second. So now it works, and yeah, just as expected. So as I was saying, for a complex string like this one, this can be kind of a pain. And so that's why starting with ES6, we have a much better tool for doing this kind of stuff now, which is called template literals. So with template literals, we can write a string in a more normal way and then basically insert the variables directly into the string. And then they will simply be replaced. So basically a template literal can assemble multiple pieces into one final string. So let me show you how that works. So let's call this one Jonas new. And now to write a template literal, we need to use backticks. So that's this symbol here. And on the English keyboard, you will find this one above the Tab key. So again, we really need to use these backticks to tell JavaScript that we're writing a template string. The single quotes or the double quotes won't work for what we're going to do now. So now, as I said, we simply write a string and insert the variables in there. So I'm, and then we use the $, curly braces, and then the variable name. So I'm first name. And just to see if this actually works, let's log it to console. So that's Jonas new. And indeed, I am Jonas. So you see that this is much easier because all we have is this one string, and then here we used this syntax to insert the first name variable. And now we can continue this, and it's going to be a lot easier. A, and then again a variable. Now in this case, we actually need a calculation, and that's no problem at all. We can basically write any JavaScript here inside of these curly braces. All right. Technically, we can write any expressions, but more about expressions in one of the later lectures. So year minus birth year, just as we did above, year old, and then teacher. So no plus signs, no thinking where we should put the spaces like we did here. And so this is a lot easier. Let's reload. Oh, and indeed, there is a bug here. So of course, that's not teacher. That's actually the value of the variable job that we're interested in here. But once again, we found this bug because we simply read the error message. So get into this habit of always reading the error message to try to figure out where you are wrong. All right. And now, of course, it works. And I hope that you can see that this is a way easier way of writing this string. This really kind of assembles the string using the pieces that we give it. For example, this variable here, or this value that is produced by the minus operator. Great. So now you know how template strings work in JavaScript, and in particular in ES6. And actually, it's one of the most used ES6 features. It's really amazing and really useful in many situations. Now, I just wanted to let you know that we can actually also use backticks to write all strings. So strings where we do not insert any of these kind of placeholders here, like this. So let me just demonstrate that to you. So we can use backticks for any regular string. So you see that it works here just the same. And many developers actually started using backticks for all strings, because then you don't have to think about which quotation marks you should use. You just use backticks always. And then in case you need to insert a variable, then it's much easier than to go back and switch out the regular quotes. So that's a choice that you can make. I actually don't do that myself, but I can see that it actually makes sense. All right. Now, another great use case of template literals is to create multi-line strings. So that's something that before template strings was a bit cumbersome to write. So let me just show that to you. So if you wanted a multi-line string before ES6, you would have to write string with, and then you needed this \n, which in many programming languages means new line. All right. So basically, this is like a special character in programming, which in strings always means that a new line should be created. And then in JavaScript, we would need another \, like this. And then we could move to the next line and continue here. Multiple, let's create a new one, and then lines. And this actually only works because of a bug that's in the language. But let's see. So we get string with multiple lines. And you see that it's all the same string, but yeah, spread across multiple lines. But indeed, now with template strings, there is an easier way of doing this. So all we have to do is simply hit return, and it will create a new line for us. And this is actually going to be immensely useful later when we start building HTML from JavaScript. So by then we will be able to use these backticks to create multi-line HTML elements to insert them onto a page dynamically. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Let's just see if this works, and indeed it does. So whenever you need a multi-line string, you always make sure to use this template literal, because it's a lot cleaner. All right, and that's actually it about template literals. In the next lecture, we will finally start to make our code a lot more fun and take it to the next level by taking decisions. Welcome back. Let's now make coding even more fun and actually take decisions with our code to make it look a lot more real. So let's say that we want to write a program which checks whether a person is allowed to start taking a driver's license or not. And if she is, then it will print that to the console, and if not, it will print how many years are left until the person can start taking the driver's license. So let's start with an age, and let's set it to 19. So we have this age, and we already know how to check if this age is at least 18, which is the legal required age to start a driving license, at least here in Europe. So let's actually create a variable with that. And I think we actually already did that. Let's call this one is old enough. So again, with a variable name that describes exactly what we want here. So remember, to check if the age is at least 18, we need it to be greater or equal than 18. And so this will then include 18. So if the age is 18, the result of this operator here, or of this operation, will then be true. Only if the age is 17 or 16 or anything below, it will turn out to be false. Okay, so we have a Boolean value now, and we can use this to take decisions using an if statement. And the if statement works like this. All we have to do is write if, then open parentheses, and then in here goes a condition that is evaluated. And if this condition turns out to be true, then this block will be executed. So basically whatever code that we write into this block, which is denoted by these curly braces, will be executed whenever the condition that's here is true. So in this case, let's put the condition, and with condition I basically mean something that is a Boolean value. So let's use our is old enough variable here, because we already know that this will always be a Boolean. So again, whenever this value here is true, then the code that's in this block here will be executed. And if it's false, well, then it's not going to be executed. So let's log to the console. Sarah can start driving license. And let's just add a fun emoji here. And on the Mac, that's Command Control Space, and on Windows 10, the shortcut is Windows plus the period sign. But adding the emoji here is also not really important. So let's give it a save and try this out now. And indeed, we get Sarah can start her driving license. And that's because the age is 19, and so it's above 18. So this is true, and so if is old enough is true, then this block of code here will be executed, which in this case is just one line, but it could of course be multiple lines. So now let's put it to something else, so 15, and so now this is false, and so then this code block here should not be executed. So give it a save, let's try, and indeed we get no output this time. And so that means that it worked. So let's put it back to 19. And in practice, we always write this condition directly here. So let's do that. So what we want is just this part. So let's get rid of this. And so this is a lot more common. Let's actually get rid of this. And so we basically do this operation here. This will then return true or false. And depending on that, this code block will then be executed. And actually, let's put it back to 15, because now we can do something else, which is to actually add an else block. And we do that simply by writing else right after this first if block, and then we add another block. So what do you think this else block is for? Well, this else block will basically be executed whenever this condition here is false. So right now the age is below 18, and so this is false, and so as we already know, this block here will not be executed. Instead, the else block will be executed. So whatever code we have here. So let's write some code in here. And as I said in the beginning, we will calculate how many years are left for Sarah to start taking her license. So let's calculate that. Years left. And so that's simply 18 minus the age, right? And then we can log a nice string to the console which contains this variable. And as we learned in the last lecture, the best way of doing that is to use a template literal. So backticks, and then we say Sarah is too young. Wait another, and then we insert or placeholder here, basically. So years left, and then years. Okay. So the result of this should be 18 minus 15, which is 3. And so we should see wait another 3 years. So let's check that. And indeed, that's exactly what we got. And so again, since this condition here, so this operation basically turned out to be false, then this block of code was executed. Great. Just keep in mind that this else block is actually optional, right? So in the beginning, we didn't have this else block and it still did work. So when there is no else block, JavaScript will then simply move on to the next line after the if statement in case that the condition is false. Great. Now you know what an if-else statement is and how it works. And this is actually one of the most important things in programming. We take decisions with code all the time, which is essentially what we did here, so that we can execute certain parts of our program based on certain conditions. Okay? Now what we have here, this if-else statement, which is the official name of this kind of construction here, is called a control structure. So basically this structure here is called an if-else control structure. And it is called a control structure because this structure actually allows us to have more control over the way that our code is executed. For example, in this if-else statement, the whole code does not just execute in a linear way. So JavaScript does not execute all of this code here linearly. Instead, we can now control blocks of code that should execute and blocks that should not execute. And so again, that gives us a lot more control over how our code works, and that's why this is called a control structure. Okay, and there are other control structures that we're going to go into a bit later. All right, so I hope that you can see how this really takes our code to the next level. Now, just to make sure that you really understood this concept, let's create another very small and simple example here. And this time, let's actually create a variable conditionally and not just always use console.log. So let's create a birth year variable. I think we don't have it in this lecture yet. That's right. And so now what we want to do is to create a variable called century, which will basically contain the century in which this person was born. So in this case, it was the 20th century. But for example, if the person was born in, like, let's say 2015, then it would be the 21st century. So to do that, we can of course write an if-else statement. So we can say if the birth year is below or equal to 2000, then let century equal 20. And so that then means the 20th century. And if not, then let century be 21. So we're assuming that the person is not born in like the 19th century. So we're not accounting for something like this, for example. So instead, we always have the 20th or the 21st century. Now, to actually make this work, we need to define the century variable outside of the if or else blocks. We will go deeply into why that is, but for now, what you need to know is that this is because a variable that we define inside of any code block, which is what this here is. So this is a code block, and this is a code block, and any variable that we declare inside of one of these blocks will not be accessible outside of the block. So let me just show that to you very quickly. So if I try to read century now, then I will get an error here. You see, century is not defined. And so what we need to do is to define century outside and simply leave it empty. And then in here, we can then conditionally reassign it. Okay? And so now let's see how this works. And indeed, now we get the century 20. So 1998 is below 2000, and so this person was born in the 20th century. Now let's say 2012, and so that should now be 21st century. And indeed, that's exactly the result. So I hope that this example 2 made sense to you. Now, don't worry about the fact that we had to declare the century variable outside of the blocks. What matters here is that you understand the logic of the if-else statement. Okay? And I hope that was clear enough. But anyway, let's quickly recap. We can take decisions using code using the if-else statement. And for that, we write if, and then we open up parentheses, and in there we need a condition. And a condition is essentially any code that returns a true or a false value. And so this is a perfect example of that, because this operator here will return true or false, right? And so we can use this operator to create a condition, essentially. Then, if the condition is true, this block will be executed. So all the code that is in there, no matter how many lines of code there are. Now, if the condition turns out to be false, then this else block will be executed instead. So JavaScript will then skip this first block and go to the second block, which is this one. But the else block is actually optional. So if you don't have the else block, then simply no code will be executed. And this, in a nutshell, is how the if-else statement works. And remember that this is really powerful. So make sure that you really understand how this works. And when you do understand, then you can move on to the next video where there is a small challenge waiting for you. Again, I hope that you managed to do this. So let me show you how I did it. So let's start by getting this code from the other challenge. So coding challenge number 1, because of course we don't have to repeat the same code. So here we have the mass and the height of both John and Mark, and we already have their BMIs calculated. We also have this condition here basically already. So this operation here already tells us whether Mark has a higher BMI or not, right? So let's get rid of this. And so let's write or if else statement. So if BMI Mark is greater than BMI John, and here we could have just used this variable, right? So we could have written Mark higher BMI right here. But as I said in the previous lecture, it's actually more common to write the condition directly in here. So let's get rid of this variable here. And then let's come here and get this string that we want to then log to the console. So console.log. And so this makes sense, right? So if BMI Mark is greater than BMI John, then we log to the console, Mark's BMI is higher than John's. And if not, then we use the else statement. So let's copy this one here. So in this case, John's BMI is higher than Mark's. And actually, let's log both of them to the console here first, just so we see if our if else statement is working as expected. So BMI Mark and BMI John. And as you see here, the VS Code auto-completion is pretty smart. Give it a save. Let's try that. And we see John's BMI is higher than Mark's. So this one is Mark's, this one is John's, and indeed, John's BMI is higher. And so basically, this condition here turned out to be false, and the else block was executed. So let's try the same now with this first set of data here. And I'm commenting them out again using command/ or control/ on Windows. So I need to comment out this one. Okay, give it a save. And now we should see the opposite. And indeed, now Mark's BMI is higher than John's. So that is part one, right? And now part two is to actually write a template string, or this should be called a template literal. We just fixed that. So we should use a template literal to include the actual BMI values. So like this here between parentheses. So let's do that. And so we're going to transform this to backticks. So that's the first thing. And then let's see the template again. Okay, so after the BMI, we include the parentheses. And then in the parentheses is where we want the actual value. And so this is where we put essentially the placeholder. So here we will put BMI Mark. And here BMI John. Right, and now let's just copy this to make it a bit faster. Mark, and then here John. Okay, let's see. And yeah, that works just fine. Cool. So with this, we solved the challenge. And again, if you did it in a slightly different way, don't worry at all. That's completely normal, and it's actually a good thing. It means that you're basically finding your own style of coding, which is really a good thing. So don't worry about that. What matters is that you actually used an if-else statement. That was, of course, mandatory. Otherwise, you couldn't have make this work at all. All right. So this was a lot of fun because we actually made our code do something now. I hope you can really feel that as well.